Hashem, we're up to Parshas Chukas, and this year, this calendar year, we've already studied chapter 19 with Rashi because it's Parshas Para. So first we'll start with chapter 20, review that, and then we'll go back to chapter 19. There's so many interesting things in the Parsha, we sometimes don't get to the middle of it. So chapter 20, Pasuk Aleph. After the Para Aduma, which is going to be relevant, because why is it appearing here? You have to bear in mind, when was the Para Aduma taught? When was the law of the red heifer taught? So, does anybody know? So the Gemara tells us, yeah, you know when it was taught?
Well, wasn't it taught like 40 years prior?
Exactly right. Exactly right. Baruch Hashem. Sason Simcha. That it was taught on the 10th day of Nisan, 1 year, almost 1 year to the day. Excuse me. Where's that? Almost 1 year from when they left. And that's what the Gemara says it was taught. That's what the Gemara in Tanis says it was taught. So now, 40 years later, the Torah jumps and tells us about the death of Miriam. And it's a very big question. It's a pella. Why are these two passages next to each other? And they're not next to each other chronologically. Hello there, Mordechai. Hello there, Aviva. But the soup will be ready tomorrow. I mean, it's cooking overnight. We just prepared it. It's going to be very good. It's potato vegetable soup, but I don't want anybody to take it's still cold. How was your gathering this morning?
A lot closer to be a friend.
Baruch Hashem. So we're chapter 20.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I was just going to say that maybe the law itself was already given, but in chapter 19 it specifically says to give it to Elazar, and they wouldn't have needed purifying from dead until they came into a land. So maybe that's why it's in the 40th year.
But the Gemara says specifically that the passage was given
the mitzvah, but it says Elazar Kohen v'saraf otah lefanav. So Elazar Kohen was only a baby when they came to Marah.
Okay, it's an interesting point. We have to look back at the Gemara and see what they say. How are you doing? Baruch Hashem. Grab a chumash. You know where they are, Yehuda?
Huh?
You know where the chumashim are?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's an interesting point. We have to look back at the Gemara and see what they say. No, to the left, right there. Yeah, so we have to see what we'll have to. Rabbi Yosef has a good question. But anyway, let's go to the Rashi on this first pasuk, chapter 20, verse 1. Vayavo b'nei Yisrael kol ha'ida. So all the children of Israel came to Midbar Tzin, b'chodesh harishon, in the first month. And the Gemara says in the first one, the second year. No, this is in the 40th year. Vayeshev ha'am b'kadesh, and the people settled in Kadesh. V'tama sham Miriam v'tikaver sham, and Miriam died there, and she was buried there. So we're at chapter 20, verse 1. Yehuda. So Bamidbar. So let's see what Rashi says. We just do the Rashi. Kol Eda Shlema, the whole assembly. Shekvar Mesu Mesi Midbar, Ve'elu Pershul Chayim. So Rashi is telling us that this is after everybody else has died. Everybody's died out. Now everybody who's left is going to make it in. Except, of course, Miriam, Aaron, and Moshe. And now we start to have them dying out. So that's what Rashi tells us is. So, here we go. They have a footnote here, because Rashi is going to ask this question. I said the Gemara in Tanis, but that was wrong. It's the Gemara in Gittin. Atamasha Miriam, Lama Nismacha Misas Miriam with Parshas Paraduma. So Rashi says, why is this passage of Miriam next to the passage of the red heifer? Even though, and they quote here in the footnote, the laws of the red heifer were given, according to Gemara in Gittin 68, on the day that the Mishkan was built. So And to answer Rabbi Yossi's question, we could say that to tell us mitzvah biskan, that the mitzvah is with the, maybe the reason why it says Elazar is that the mitzvah was with the deputy. Anyway, why are the two passages next to each other? To tell you, just as the sacrifices atoned, also the death of the tzaddikim atoned. And today, does anybody know whose yortzeit it is today?
Yes.
Speaking of the tzaddik, the Rebbe's yortzeit. So speaking of the fact that the death of the tzaddikim atoned, and today is the death, this is the yortzeit of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So it's especially powerful. And this whole concept of the death of the tzaddikim atoning is always been challenging for me, but it is definitely a powerful concept in the Chazal. I mean, the reason why it's challenging is because there are other faiths that teach it too. That Hashem takes the tzaddikim as a korban. You follow that, Yehuda?
Yeah.
It's a very difficult idea. Okay, that's Rashi's answer why they're next to each other, to teach us these are two different methods of atoning. And Miriam died there, Vatikaver Sham. Rashi says, Vatama Sham Miriam, Afhi Benishika Mesa. She also died with a kiss. Who else died with a kiss? The Aaron died with a kiss. And so even though we haven't read about the death of Aaron yet in the Torah, we know that the Gemara tells us that Aaron died with a kiss. And so Miriam also died in that manner. But by Aaron, it says through the mouth of God, Al Pi Hashem. But here it doesn't say it by Miriam. Sheino derech kavod shamawa, because it's Uba Aaron nemar Al Pi Hashem be'elam maseh. So in Parshas Elam Maseh, it does say by Aaron. It says Al Pi Hashem with a kiss, but it's not appropriate to speak that way about, for God to speak that way about Miriam. I'm not sure why it's any more appropriate to say that God kissed Aaron than it is to say God kissed Miriam, but this is the way they don't want to speak in that manner. Okay. So now, right after Miriam dies, the water disappears. And this is also a reminder to us about that the whole Rashi is going to tell us that the water came in the merit of Miriam. There was no water. So they gathered on Moshe and Aaron. Rashi says, Miriam. This teaches us that for all 40 years, they had a well in the merit of Miriam. In the merit of Miriam, they had a well. That's from the Gemara in Tainus. So, where was the first place that the Jewish people went and complained about water? Where?
First 3 days after.
Yeah, and what was that place called? Where did they come? Even before those 3 days, when they traveled, they came to Mara. And here, Moshe threw a stick into the water and it turned the bitter water into sweet. And here we see the name Miriam, could be Mariam, bitter sea. So the people gathered, Vayorev Ha'am and Moshe, the people fought with Moshe. Vayomru more, and they said to Moshe, V'hu gavanu b'dvar achenu l'fnei Hashem. We wish we had died. Rashi says, How gavanu, how we wish we would have died, b'dvar achenu, when our brothers died, b'misas achenu, when our brothers died through the plague. Which plague? So Rashi doesn't tell us, but the commentaries say it's through all the plagues. Shalom Aleichem, how are we doing? Baruch Hashem. How are you guys doing? I can't read your hat. Tell me what it says.
But it's a Washington Nationals hat.
Oh, Nationals. Okay,
Can't
beautiful.
tell, it could be anything, being red.
No, I can't see. My eyesight's terrible. All right, Sam. Okay, so we're up to chapter 20, verse 3 of Bamidbar. And we made Shemisa Same Meguna Mimena. The death by thirst is worse than the death through the plague. Rashi says they're saying we wish we had died through death by plague than death by thirst. Okay. So now Vatesh. So let's skip the page. All right, Adam. Rabbi Chumash. Baruch Hashem. So first of all, we want to say that even though these texts looks identical to the complaints that they made in Bishalach, no, you can take that if that's a chumash, but right there on the shelf there is a chumashim. Whatever you want. So he says, so even though this text is identical, there's a crucial difference. Crucial difference is that this is a new generation and it's 40 years later. So Moshe is going to make the fatal mistake of assuming he's talking to the same generation, when really it's a different generation, and he had to have a different approach. I mean, it's so obvious. So text is setting him up. It says, why did you bring us to this wilderness to die there, us and our animals? Why did you bring us up from Egypt to bring us to this bad place? It's not a place of seeds, figs, grapes, pomegranates, and there's no water to drink. Yesterday we were studying the Baal Turim. The Baal Turim points out that usually in the Torah, the Geffen appears before the figs, but this is the case where figs appears before the Geffen. Moshe and Aaron came before the community. Oh, Mr. Dobson. Moshe and Aaron came before the community to the entrance of the tent. And they fell on their faces. God appeared. So now we're going to see how God gives Moshe the instructions. It says, take your staff, gather up the community, you and Aaron, you have to speak to the rock, and will give forth its water. Give water will come forth from the rock. And the water will be able to nourish the community and their flock. So we see from here, she says that God didn't just care about the people, he also cared about their property. Since we're going to have enough to take care of your property. Moshe took the stick before God just like he was commanded. And Moshe and Aaron took they gathered up the community towards the rock. Shimuna Hamorim. Listen now, you rebels. From this rock will we take forth water. What do you notice about the word Hamorim? What do you notice, Elliot? Grab a chumash, Colby. Grab a chumash.
Spelled like Miriam.
It's exactly spelled the exact same way as Miriam. And so someone pointed out that Moshe was still in deep mourning for his sister. His sister was like a mother figure to him. And she was involved in raising him. She was quite possibly. Good to see you, Kobe. Good to see you. So he says, Shimona Morim, listen now, you rebels, should we take forth water from this rock? From this rock, should we take forth water? Rashi says, this is one of the places where something small held that which was greater, meaning to say that there was just a small area, but all of Israel was able to gather there. Several million people were able to gather there. And he says, from this rock will we take forth water. So from the pshat, it just sounds like Moshe and Aaron were saying do you want us to take forth the water from the rock? But Rashi takes a totally different reading from this. And these next two psukim are two of the most important psukim in the Torah, because this is what many people say is the sin of Moshe. And Rashi says as follows: Moshe and Aaron could not identify the rock, so they were asking the question: should we bring forth the water from this rock? Is this the rock? They were asking. This rock went and hid amongst the other rocks. Where else do we see rocks moving around in Yaakov, by Yaakov? That's one of the places. There's other places, think about it. And he says, we said, this rock went and hid. Kishanistali Kaber, when the well of Miriam left, the rock hid. So the people were heckling Moshe, and they were saying, and Aaron, they were saying, what does it matter which rock? Why can't you take it out from any rock? And so therefore Moshe, this is why Rashi's justifying why Moshe is calling them the rebels, because or else is unjustified. They're entitled to ask for water. Why can't they ask for water? You can't survive without water. Right? By the way, Greg, is that the soup or the tea?
Tea.
Okay, good. The soup's not ready yet. The soup will be ready in the morning. It'll be soak shmak in the morning. It's potato vegetable. Oh, how you doing? Baruch Hashem. So, everyone's pulling up today. Everyone's pulling up. Making me happy. Shkoya. Hold on, don't leave me hanging. All right, so he says, should we take forth water from this rock? Rashi says, Davar acher, lashon yevani shotim. So the first question, so Rashi's interpreting what this word morim means. He says the first approach is it means the wayward ones. But then there's another Rashi which says that it means fools. It's a Greek word. I don't remember that word in the Greek, but okay, maybe, I don't know what I studied Greek and I remember nothing of it. I studied so hard. I spent so many hours studying it in college, so many hours. I really applied myself and I don't remember it. Okay. Morim es morehem. Third approach. What does the word morim mean? He instructing their teachers. That's so disrespectful. Meaning to say, shall we bring forth water from the rock which we were not commanded? Meaning to say you're a generation that tries to instruct their teachers. It's very disrespectful to instruct your teachers. Even if you think your teacher is wrong, you have to only, and they're usually, of course, why wouldn't they be wrong? They're humans like everybody else. So you have to be very careful how you guide them in seeing their mistake, or else it's arrogance. So these are the three explanations Rashi gives for the word morim. Either it means the rebellious ones, or else it means the fools, or else it means disrespectful because they instruct their teachers. And now we come to the verse that many point to as Moshe's downfall and Aaron's downfall, but really it's Moshe here. Vayoram Moshe es yado. Moshe lifts his hand. Vayachas aselav b'mateu pamayim, and he strikes the rock with his staff twice. He strikes it twice. Vayetzu mayim ravim, and a lot of water flew forward. Vateshta edo viram, and it fed the community and their animals. So before we read Rashi said, Rambam says that Moshe's sin here was that he lost his temper. And he lost his temper here. Why did he hit it twice? He should have just hit it once. So Rashi has to explain why did he hit it twice. So Rashi explains Sheba Rishona. Does anybody know why does he hit it twice? Anybody hear an explanation? Anybody hear an explanation? All right, you heard something? What'd you hear?
No.
Oh, By the way, I usually studies from the Rebbe's Klita, and today's the Rebbe's yard site. So fair to say, without the Lubavitcher Rebbe, many of us would not be here, including maybe even me. And when my mother was, she says, when she was a young girl, she went to a Chabad wedding, her cousins, and she went to Ramaz when she was very little. And one of the Hasidim of the Rebbe said to her, when you get older, marry somebody Jewish. That's all they told her. But that stuck with her. And that's why, even though she didn't come from, I mean, my grandfather he had to keep his store open on Shabbos, but he went to shul and he was involved, but it was conservative shul. And most of the Jews who attended conservative shuls disappeared. But my mother, because this Chabad relative said that to her, she always wanted to marry somebody who was, strictly speaking, Shomer Shabbos. That's always what she wanted. Because that, so everybody, so many of us are here because of the Rebbe. We don't even know. We don't even know how we're here because of the Rebbe. That's just his impact was so incredible, was so far-reaching that you can't even imagine. It's incomprehensible. Yes, Greg.
My life, come on.
Chabad brought her, so Moshe wouldn't be here. So Yeshiva wouldn't have a minyan half the time. Because Moshe makes the minyan most of the time. So and it's all because of the Rebbe. It's all because of the Rebbe. And one time when Seth is here in person, he'll tell us the story of how he's here because of the Rebbe. Also, so many of us are here because of the Rebbe. Anyway, so we say, Mefisha berishona lohotzi elatipin. Why did Moshe hit the rock twice? Because at first he only brought forth a few drops. Mefisha lo tziva makom la'koso ela v'dibartem elasav. So Moshe hit it once, and a few drops came forward because God did not tell Moshe to hit the rock. He just said, "Speak to the rock." Dibru el acher, but they were speaking to a different rock. And so it wasn't bringing forth water. Amru. Shema tzarech la'akoso, they said, maybe we need to hit it. Kavarishona, like at first, as it says, Vikita batsur. V'nizdamen lam oso selah. And then that same rock appeared. V'niku, and they struck it. So Rashi says what happened was they first spoke to a rock. They first spoke to a rock, but they spoke to the wrong rock. So then they hit a rock, and then a few drops came out, and then they hit it again, and this was the right rock, and a lot of water came out. So this is a very challenging explanation. Yeah. Let me hear, Aviva, your question.
So if God said to speak to the rock and it was the wrong rock or whatever, and then why I mean we talk, why didn't the water pour forth
Right.
heavily? Why? I mean, God could have just not made anyone, and then maybe he would have tried different.
That's one of the classic questions, Aviva, which is why is bring forth water from a rock any less of a miracle than by speaking to the rock? And why did God make this happen? So that's one of the difficulties with Rashi's explanation. If you look at Rashi to chapter 31, verse 21, it says that how did Moshe sin? Because he was angry. And because he was angry, whenever you get on shpilkus, you get angry, you make a mistake. Remember that. In my life, whenever I get like all upset and harried, I usually make the mistake. That's when the mistake happens. And Rashi says there, Shimuna Morim, Vayachas Asela, Ayidei Kas Ta, that he says later on that in chapter 31, verse 21, Rashi says the mistake happened because Moshe was angry. He hit the rock twice. But here, he doesn't say that. Here, it says that he struck the rock not out of anger, but because he had spoken to the wrong rock. So we have almost a stira, you know what a stira is? Contradiction within Rashi. So the commentaries struggle with that. And they say, well, maybe because he was angry, he made the mistake. But it's a little bit of a difficulty with Rashi because what was his sin? The very next pasuk says that Moshe did a sin. Later on, Rashi is going to say that the sin was he got angry. But if he got angry, as Aviva said, why is the water coming forth? So, you have a question, Sam? It's a very big question. That's why some commentaries don't want to say that this was the sin of Moshe. They want to say something else. Also, is it really fair to say that because he did this one sin, his lifelong dream of going into the land, like who hasn't lost their temper? Have you ever lost your temper? I mean, I've lost it. I'm never proud of it whenever I lose it. It's always upsetting to me after the fact, but to be held accountable for one mistake. So in the end, a lot of commentaries say different possible sins of Moshe, but that's a bigger problem because now they turn the mistake of Moshe into 6 mistakes. Torah says he only made 1 mistake. So look at the next pasuk. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe ve'al Aaron Yanu emantim bi la'aktisheni le'nei bnei Yisrael l'chein l'tzaviu asakal hazeh la'aretz asher nasati lahem. So God says to Moshe and Aaron, because you did not have faith in me. Why didn't he have faith? We'll see what Rashi says. Therefore, you will not bring this community into the land that I gave to them. What does it mean that he did not have faith? Gila kasuv. So that's what Rashi says. The Torah is telling us, were not for this sin, Moshe and Aaron would have entered the land. First of all, what did Aaron do here? You had a question, Arnie? What was Aaron's sin here? So the people shouldn't say to them, Ka'avon shara dor midbar, shenigzar lehem shelo yikansu la'aretz, kach hayavon Moshe v'Aaron. So Rashi says, why does the Torah have to say that this was his sin? Because we don't want to say that the sin was just like every other, the sin of the generation of the wilderness. Therefore, the Torah makes a point to say that this was his sin, even though we're not 100% sure what was his sin. Rashi seems to say the sin here was he lost his temper. Then he says, Rashi, yeah,
He said at the end of Rashi, it says because it was in front of all.
Because of his what?
Because it was in front of all of Israel.
Well, that's what Rashi is about to say. Rashi is going to say that there was another time where he sinned, and that was in Parshas Balosa, where God says, "I'm going to give you meat," and Moshe questions God. He says, "If you're going to shecht all the animals, it will not be enough to give us meat." So that was different because that sin happened in private. That conversation with God was in private, so he didn't hold it against him. But here it was in public, so Minei Kiddush Hashem. And so the commentaries say that, so here we're seeing another possible sin for Moshe and Aaron, that they did not sanctify God's name. If he had spoken to God, if he had spoken to the rock and water had come out, that would have been a Kiddush Hashem. Ramban is very troubled by this. He says, why is it less of a Kiddush Hashem to get water from the rock by speaking to it than by hitting it? So it's a very difficult passage. One time I gave a Dvar Torah about this passage, and I talked about the sin of Moshe. It just so happened to be, I don't want to say the person's name. This was a very high-ranking political figure, and this person was very upset. He was very upset that Moshe was being judged so harshly because of this mistake, and he kind of felt like political leaders should be given some flexibility, some latitude. You know, like it used to be. Now it's not the case anymore. Now political leaders can get indicted, can get arrested, and it's not career ending. It used to be that you would hold political leaders to a much higher standard than the people. And now it's like the reverse. But anyway, the point was, this guy was so upset that Moshe, he felt I was too hard on Moshe. I was saying, it's not me, it was God. What do you want from me? Anyway, let's stop here. I see it's mincha time. Shkoyach to everybody. Yeah, shkoyach.